The last person you'd expect to be dangerous is the one who watches the exits before the conversation even begins. It was just past 4 p.m. when the crowd thickened at Istanbul's Ataturk International Arrivals Hall. Tired travelers shuffled forward, dragging their suitcases, eyes dull from hours in the sky and too little legroom. The customs checkpoint buzzed with layered noise, beeping scanners, tired sighs, and sharp voices barking orders in Turkish and English. Then came the voice. A female customs officer. "That one," she said, pointing out a simple-looking woman with a duffel bag, laughing like she had just caught harmless prey. Her colleague approached. Cold. Sharp. Too casual to be harmless. "Ma'am, step aside." Random inspection. Dr. Ivy Jennings didn't flinch. She shifted her worn duffel bag over her shoulder and stepped calmly out of the queue. No questions. No raised brows. Just a nod. Her movements were so smooth, they almost disappeared into the chaos. But something was off. To the rest of the line, she looked like any other backpacker. Modestly dressed in neutral tones, low ponytail, American passport tucked in a worn leather wallet. 40-ish. Slim. Pale. Unremarkable. To the customs officers, a perfect target. The young officer who was to search through her things, mid-20s, smug grin, tight haircut, looked like he lived for moments like this. His eyes lit up as he guided her to the inspection area. Maybe he was bored. Maybe he thought she looked weak. Either way, he was about to make a mistake. "Put the bag on the table," he said, motioning to the stainless steel counter between them. "You traveling alone?" Ivy nodded. "Yes. Purpose of your visit?" "Humanitarian work. Transferring flights home." He glanced at her passport, flipped it without care, and smirked. "Sudan, huh? That's not your average tourist destination." Ivy offered a polite smile. Her voice was even. "Not a tourist." The officer snorted. "Right." As he began to unzip her duffel, another officer joined, shorter, older, eyes sharper. He stood just behind, watching. Silent. Ivy's fingers curled subtly at her sides. Her posture relaxed, but her eyes moved constantly, without turning her head. Exit left, 15 meters. Guard station, 2 personnel. Security camera above to her right. Glass doors with metal hinges. One broken. Could be used. The customs officer reached inside her bag. Pulled out a rolled-up thermal blanket. A small trauma kit. A worn change of clothes. A travel-sized water filter. He looked up. "Been doing some real camping out there?" Ivy nodded once. He pulled out a sealed medical notebook, its edges burned. Then a small GPS device. Then a set of folding utensils. "Boy Scout meets Doomsday Preppers." "Huh?" he said, glancing to his partner for a chuckle. The second officer didn't laugh. Ivy said nothing. "You don't talk much, do you?" The younger man arched a brow. "That's fine. Quiet ones usually have more to hide." He poked deeper into the bag, pulled out a paracord bracelet, a compass, another zippered pouch. Each item placed on the table was laid with performative flair, like he was unwrapping secrets from a magician's hat. But Ivy wasn't hiding magic. She was hiding history. The older officer finally stepped forward. "This all you have?" His voice was calm. Measured. Ivy nodded again. He leaned in. "You sure you're just humanitarian?" Her eyes met his. Unblinking. "I was in Sudan. That's all." A long pause passed. And still, she watched the exits. The first officer huffed, annoyed that the interrogation wasn't getting juicier. "Let's run a swab," he said, pulling out a strip and waving it over the interior lining of her bag. Nothing triggered. He frowned. "You travel a lot?" "Sometimes," she said. The older man tilted his head. "What kind of doctor?" "Trauma." Another silence. That word landed differently. "Not general. Not pediatrics. Trauma." The younger officer scoffed. "So what, you patch up broken legs?" "Something like that." If you're enjoying the story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It won't cost you anything, but it will mean the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video. The inspection continued. They found a worn paperback copy of Medevac, The Silent Front. The officer flipped it open, paused at a dog-eared page, and smirked. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Ivy didn't answer. Her silence filled the space heavier than words. Behind her, the line moved slowly. Other passengers watched, grateful they weren't the ones being picked apart. The duffel sat half-emptied now. Her belongings, all practical, all functional. Nothing flashy. No souvenirs. No makeup bag. No laptop. Everything looked too chosen. That was the first red flag. The second was how she stood. Not nervous. Not rigid. Just still. Like she'd stood like this before. Under pressure. In worse places. In worse conditions. The younger officer grinned again, sensing he was getting nowhere. He reached one last time into the bottom of the bag. Nothing. All right, he muttered. Guess you're just the world's most paranoid tourist. He turned away to start stuffing the items back in. Ivy reached for her med kit, but the older officer didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the bag's lining. He leaned in, fingers brushing softly along the seam. He paused, ran his palm along the edge again, slower this time. Then click. A small sound, almost imperceptible. The younger officer turned around. What? The older man didn't answer. Instead, he pulled back a thin strip of fabric. One Ivy had stitched with surgical precision. From inside, his fingers closed around a solid object. He pulled it out, and everything changed. The room didn't just go quiet. It stopped. In his palm was a black medallion. Smooth. Round. No name. No rank. Just a silver symbol etched into the center. A winged serpent coiled around a caduceus. The mark of Black Phantom. A unit that wasn't supposed to exist. His hand trembled slightly as he held it up to the light. The younger officer's jaw dropped. What the hell is that? The older man didn't speak. He just stared. Ivy's eyes hadn't moved. Not once. Is this real? The young one whispered. Still no answer. The customs checkpoint buzzed around them. People moved. Luggage rolled. But in this moment, it was like the world tilted slightly, just enough to make everyone uneasy. Because something wasn't right. And everyone could feel it. The older officer stared at the black medallion, like it had started ticking. The younger one was still trying to figure out why the room felt colder. And Ivy, she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. Because that symbol, the winged serpent coiled around the caduceus, wasn't something you explained. Not to people who didn't already know. It was the kind of insignia that shut conversations down, not start them. The younger officer reached toward it, but the older one jerked it away instinctively. Don't touch it. His voice cracked mid-command. That's when another man entered the room. Grey uniform, stiff posture, a different kind of authority. Checkpoint senior officer. He had the kind of face that didn't flinch at forged documents or crying tourists. The kind of man who'd seen enough to know how to spot real danger, even when it came in the shape of a woman with a medical degree and a quiet stare. What's going on here? He asked, his eyes landing instantly on the medallion. The older officer turned slowly. Wordlessly, he handed it over. The senior officer took one look and froze. The air shifted again. Sharper now. Tighter. He turned to Ivy. You need to tell me where you got this. Ivy's reply was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 pages of classified files. It's mine. No emotion. No bravado. Just fact. The younger officer tried to interject. She says she's just a doctor. Humanitarian stuff. Came from Sudan. The senior officer raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. His eyes hadn't left Ivy. She held his gaze evenly. No flicker of panic. No denial. Only stillness. The kind that came from living through chaos far worse than this. Empty the rest of the bag, the senior ordered. The younger officer moved hesitantly, fingers shaking now. He reached back into the lining, deeper into the hidden compartment. His knuckles scraped against something rough. Fabric. When he pulled it out, the bloodstain was still visible. A torn unit patch, charred along the edges. Threads fraying, sand embedded in the seams. The symbol was partially melted, but not enough to hide the outline of that same serpent and caduceus. And underneath it, he found the last item. A burned military medical log. Pages crisped and fused together. Some barely readable. Others marked with field notes in dark ink. Wound assessments. Evac coordinates. Emergency triage protocols. Names blacked out. Coordinates redacted. But the paper felt old. Real. Touched by fire and sand and time. The younger officer stumbled back. He hadn't signed up for this. I don't think she's just a doctor, he muttered. The senior officer said nothing. He flipped the medallion in his hand once. Twice. Then he slowly placed it on the table. "Step out," he told the two lower officers. They hesitated. "Now." They left. No argument. Outside, the checkpoint noise continued. Bags rolling, children crying, agents barking out numbers. But inside this small inspection room, it was dead silent. The senior officer stood across from Ivy, hands folded in front of him. "I've only seen that medallion once," he said. "A decade ago, at Incirlik. American black site evac. Man wearing it disappeared into a helicopter, and no one ever saw him again." He leaned forward slightly. "And now here you are." Ivy looked at him calmly. "You know what that symbol means?" she asked. He nodded. "Officially, it doesn't." She gave the faintest nod in return. "Then we understand each other." But understanding wasn't the problem. What came next was... The officer exhaled sharply, like the room was pressing down on his lungs. "Black Phantom," he muttered. "They're real." Ivy didn't answer. He took that as confirmation. "Jesus." He stepped back, rubbed his face, and glanced at the medallion again. Then at the patch. Then at the logbook. All of it was wrong. Out of place. Out of time. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked. Still, she didn't speak. Because this wasn't the moment to explain. This was the moment to survive. And she knew, the more you said, the more you lost. The senior officer studied her in silence for another long beat. His radio crackled on his chest. "Control to checkpoint 2, status update?" He reached up, pressed it once, then released it without speaking. They weren't ready for this. No one was. He glanced out the glass window of the inspection room. The younger officer was whispering to someone at the scanner station. Word was already spreading. Ivy knew what came next. A call. Then another. Then someone in a dark suit would ask questions they already knew the answers to. She had minutes. Maybe. The senior officer returned his gaze to her. "You know I'm going to have to call it in," he said. "I know," she replied. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been building in his throat since he saw the medallion. "Are you still active?" Ivy's reply was soft, but clear. "No." Another silence. This one heavier. Because no didn't mean harmless. It just meant off the leash. He looked at the bag. At the items. At her steady hands. Everything about her was clinical. Quiet. Precise. Too clean for coincidence. And when he finally spoke again, his voice dropped. "You were Black Phantom." "I was," she said. He nodded slowly. Then whispered, more to himself than to her. "Then we have a problem." The room held still like it knew what came next would change everything. The senior officer stared at Ivy Jennings, as if trying to see through her. Past the backpack. Past the calm exterior. Past the silence. He didn't ask who she was. He asked a different kind of question. "Who else knows you're here?" Ivy didn't flinch. "No one that matters." Her voice was low. Flat. As if she were discussing the weather. The officer studied her. "You're not on any manifest. No red flags. No agency alerts." "I'm not supposed to be." He tilted his head, choosing his next words carefully. "You don't carry that medallion unless you've earned it. And even then, no one carries it in public. Ever." Ivy slowly reached across the table and picked up the burned unit patch. She brushed a bit of ash off its edge and placed it down gently. Then she looked him in the eye. "Unit Echo 9. Call sign Seraph." Time cracked. The senior officer blinked like he'd heard a ghost. That name. He knew that name. Every NATO-aligned intelligence officer had heard it. Whispers. Rumors. Debriefs with entire paragraphs blacked out. A name spoken in closed-door sessions. A name that showed up once. Only once. After a failed extraction in northern Syria. 5 diplomats caught in an ambush. Vehicles destroyed. Communications blacked out. Mission considered lost. Until one team made it in. And one person got them out. No formal credits. No medals. No photos. Just a line in a report. Echo 9. Seraph. Extraction successful. Hostages secure. Among those rescued, a Turkish diplomatic envoy. High value. High risk. That had been nearly 6 years ago. And now, she was sitting across from him. Dressed like a civilian. Holding a unit patch stained in blood and soot. The senior officer exhaled. Long uneven. He moved to a chair. Sat down slowly. "Seraph," he muttered. "You're a myth." Ivy offered no reaction. "Because myths don't need defending." "Why now?" he asked. "Why come through here?" Ivy gave a half-smile. It didn't reach her eyes. You think I had a choice? He frowned. They're looking for you? They're always looking. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier. He glanced again at the black medallion. Echo 9. Black Phantom. Seraph. It was like opening a locked file with no clearance. You saved one of ours, he said after a beat. The diplomat. Ankara. Ivy gave a small nod. He was bleeding out. Shot through the lung. The rest of the convoy was pinned behind a ridge. We had 12 minutes before artillery reached our position. You got them all out. 6 out. 1 didn't make it. That one was a traitor, he said quickly. We found out later. Ivy didn't react. She just said, still counted. Silence again. Outside the room, the noise of the airport carried on, ordinary, oblivious. But inside, the floor might as well have dropped away. The senior officer leaned back. I shouldn't be having this conversation, he murmured. Not without a second pair of ears. Not without recording. Then don't, Ivy said. You're too calm for someone who just got outed. I've had practice. He almost laughed. Almost. He didn't lean back this time. Instead, he leaned forward again. Closer, quieter, as if the question itself carried weight too dangerous to float through the air casually. What happened, Seraph? Ivy Jennings didn't blink. She stared at the wall just over his shoulder, eyes like mirrors, reflecting something far away. Maybe years. Maybe miles. Maybe hell. The mission fell apart, she said. Simple words. But they dropped like concrete. Someone higher up pulled the plug mid-op. We were too deep to pull out clean. We were told to burn everything, including the truth. And your team? He asked, though his voice had lost all the cocky sharpness it had started with. Her eyes didn't waver. Her voice didn't crack. Gone. 1 syllable. But it landed like a body bag unzipped on concrete. He didn't ask more. Some truths didn't need to be reopened. Some wounds still bled under skin. He rubbed the back of his neck. The tremor in his fingers betrayed the way her story was rearranging everything inside him. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. Not like this. If even half the stories about Echo 9 are true. They are, she said. Not pride. Not warning. Just fact. He swallowed. Because Echo 9 wasn't a unit you talked about. You whispered about them. Late-night barracks rumors. Ghost stories between deployments. They weren't like SEALs or Delta Force. Echo 9 didn't exist on paper. They were the medics who ran toward gunfire. The ones who stitched wounds under rocket fire, who carried bleeding operatives on their backs through burning cities, who held tourniquets with one hand while neutralizing targets with the other. Surgical strike medics. Healers trained to kill. They weren't a myth. They were a paradox. Some called them angels. Some called them demons. Most just called them Black Phantom. And Seraph? She was their ghost. There were rumors that she once revived a downed pilot while dangling from a rappelling line under enemy fire. That she broke into a cartel hospital to extract an undercover asset, leaving no trace but 20 dead bodies and a heartbeat on the operating table. And then there was Ankara, that whispered NATO tale about the ambush on the convoy transporting 5 diplomats. 2 American, 1 Canadian, 1 French, and 1 Turkish. No official report. No survivors listed. But 5 men showed up, weeks later, alive. Silent. And terrified. None of them talked. But 1 Turkish official, now retired, kept a worn bullet casing on his desk. When asked why, he'd say, because the woman who carried me out of that firestorm never fired a shot she didn't mean. That woman was Seraph. And now she stood in a customs interrogation room, in travel-worn clothes, stripped of everything, except the weight of those stories. You need to go, the officer said suddenly. Urgency wrapped around his voice like barbed wire. Get out of this airport. Get on a plane. Disappear. I'm trying, Ivy said simply. He stood now, unsure what to do with his hands, his rank, or the badge clipped to his chest. All of it felt small. And then the question came. Quiet. Fragile. Loaded. Are you still capable? Ivy tilted her head just slightly, like a shadow caught shifting in the corner of your eye. Capable of what? He hesitated. Of what you used to do. She didn't rush her answer. Didn't blink. Didn't lie. Capable, she said. Always. Willing? Only if I have no choice. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any yes. He nodded, a quiet acceptance settling over him like ash after an explosion. Then he reached for his radio, then froze. You understand, if I call this in, it doesn't end here. I know. Then why give your name? He asked. Her eyes met his, steady and sharp. Because I'd rather be hunted as Seraph than dismissed as nobody. That wasn't defiance. It wasn't pride. It was something worse. It was clarity. She wasn't asking for attention. She was reclaiming the narrative, before someone else twisted it into something uglier, louder, and more dangerous. He turned to the door, paused, his hand on the knob, shoulders stiff. I'm giving you 5 minutes, he said quietly. No report. No alert. No trace. Then, almost reluctantly, for what it's worth. I'm sorry. She stood. No need, Ivy said softly. You're not the first person to underestimate me. And with that, she lifted the patch, slid the black medallion, the insignia of Black Phantom, back into its hidden compartment, and zipped the duffel shut. One clean motion. Surgical. Almost reverent. The way someone seals a grave. She walked out with the silent grace of someone who'd crossed borders where landmines were more common than trees. And behind her? Silence. The kind that settles after judgment collapses under the weight of truth. In the customs corridor, officers stepped back instinctively. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. They didn't understand what they were looking at, only that they'd seen something rare. Dangerous. Sacred. A ghost breathing. Inside, the senior officer sat down hard. Hands shaking. Heart still stuttering. He'd made the call. One. Short. Call. Just enough to verify what his gut already knew. Echo 9. Call sign, Seraph. The voice on the other end didn't ask for clarification. It simply said, give her safe passage. No follow-up. No explanation. And most chilling, no record of the call. Because people like Ivy Jennings didn't get tracked. They got remembered. Or they got erased. Sometimes both. He stared at the sealed inspection report in front of him. Blank. Because officially, nothing happened. But everything had. He opened his drawer, pulled out a memo form, and began typing. Effective immediately. All inspection personnel must treat every traveler with dignity and restraint. No assumptions. No unnecessary escalations. He hesitated, then added, especially when they don't look like much. By the next day, word had spread. Not through official channels, but through whispers. The female officer who'd mocked Ivy resigned. No fanfare. No farewell. Her letter cited personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. You can't come back from laughing at a ghost. Especially when that ghost once stabilized a fellow medic while taking sniper fire, and then carried him through a war zone with a femoral bleed, and survived. A few weeks later, in military backchannels and encrypted forums, the phrase began circulating again. Seraph lives. It wasn't a call to action. It was a warning, because while some revered her, others had reason to fear her. There were still enemies. Loose ends. Cartels, rogue cells, betrayed assets from past operations who knew her only by reputation, but blamed her for things she'd barely survived herself. They believed she disappeared to avoid justice. They were wrong. She disappeared to protect it. But word travels fast in the wrong circles. And some people had started asking questions again. Too many. Ivy knew. That's why she never stayed anywhere more than 2 nights. She burned every piece of tech she touched. Changed her look every 4 days. Slept with her duffel zipped and positioned by the window, always within reach. Predators don't sleep. And neither did she. Somewhere in Southeast Asia, in a jungle outpost near the border of Laos, a small, unofficial clinic opened again. No paperwork. No grand reopening. Just a flickering neon light and a line of wounded men who couldn't afford hospitals. They called her Ivy. Just Ivy. She didn't ask questions. Didn't talk about where she'd been. But when a child came in with shrapnel in his leg, she removed it without anesthesia, humming softly to calm him. When a smuggler came in with a gut wound and 3 men trying to kill him, she patched him up, and they never found him again. One day, a wounded veteran stumbled into the clinic and caught a glimpse of the medallion hanging around her neck, half hidden beneath her collar. He froze, then said quietly, "You're Seraph, aren't you?" She looked at him, said nothing, but he smiled. "I just wanted to say thanks. You pulled me out of a minefield in Helmand, gave me morphine, dragged me 2 miles through fire. You told me I wouldn't die if I kept my eyes open." He nodded, blinking back something deeper than tears. "They're still open." She didn't reply, but her eyes softened, and that was enough. Back in Virginia, in a sealed Black Ops archive beneath a government building, a man in a tailored suit made a quiet update to a file. Black Phantom. Asset number 227. Jennings, Ivy. Status: active, unconfirmed. And then he stared at the file and whispered, "God help whoever finds her next." Legends don't live forever, but they don't die easily either. And Ivy Jennings? She had become something more than legend. She was a myth that fought back, a ghost that left wounds, a medic who carried both syringes and shadows. They thought they'd buried her, but Seraph had never truly disappeared. She'd simply waited, because some names don't fade. They echo, in corridors, in radios, in whispers passed from soldier to soldier like prayer. And somewhere, under jungle canopies or behind dusty borders, or in the hush of a crowd that doesn't know what it's looking at, she's still out there, watching, listening, capable.